The night was supposed to be perfect. The Dodgers had won, the crowd had roared, and the cameras caught Prince Harry and Meghan Markle laughing in their private box like the picture of California royalty. But behind those polished smiles and expensive outfits, something was brewing. Something dark, raw, and uncontainable. Hours later, under the faint glow of Montecito streetlights, that something finally erupted. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Neighbors say they heard shouting, a door slam, the sound of something metallic hitting the pavement, and then silence. The kind of silence that follows shock, like the air itself doesn't know how to move. So what really happened that night? Why were the Duke and Duchess of Sussex fighting in front of their mansion, visible to anyone passing by? And why did their security try, desperately, to shut down all footage from the scene within hours? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of that night, piece by piece. You're about to see how one public appearance spiraled into a private implosion that may have changed everything for Harry and Meghan. But before we dive into the argument, let's rewind. Because every public outburst has a hidden build-up, and for these two, the tension had been simmering for weeks. The Dodgers game was supposed to be their comeback, an easy, glamorous night out after months of bad press and failed projects. Meghan had reportedly insisted they attend, wanting to remind Hollywood that she was still part of its inner circle. She wore white, always symbolic, always calculated. Harry followed in a muted jacket, the kind that says, "I'm here, but not really." From the first inning, something was off. Witnesses said Meghan seemed restless, checking her phone every few minutes. Harry barely smiled. They weren't sitting as close as they usually did. And yet, when the cameras turned toward them, both switched on their practiced grins. We've seen this play before, the polished image versus the private cracks. But that night, the cracks weren't subtle. During a break, Meghan leaned in to whisper something. Harry's shoulders stiffened. He turned away. The gesture was small, but enough for an entire VIP section to notice. One producer sitting nearby described it later. It was like watching a couple perform a scene they didn't rehearse. So why go out if things were that tense? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because for Meghan, every appearance is a narrative, a brand move, a calculated chapter in the story she wants the world to read. And the Dodgers game was her latest rewrite, a glamorous night meant to wash away rumors of separation, lawsuits, and failed contracts. Only this time, it didn't work. As the game ended and the crowd poured out, Harry was first to stand. Meghan hesitated. Photographers caught the split-second moment. He reached for his phone. She adjusted her hair. They didn't look at each other. And then, like two actors exiting from opposite wings, they disappeared into the hallway. Now here's where things get interesting. The drive from the stadium to their Montecito home usually takes about an hour and a half. But multiple sources confirmed they didn't arrive until nearly midnight. That's almost 2 hours unaccounted for. Where did they go? Who did they talk to? And what happened in that car? One insider claimed Harry had been texting an old army friend during the game, someone who recently spoke to the British press. Meghan reportedly saw the messages and accused him of leaking personal details about their family life. Harry denied it, but the accusation stung. For him, privacy isn't just a preference, it's a wound. He's been haunted by it since childhood. To have his own wife question his loyalty must have felt like a knife in an old scar. By the time they reached Montecito, neighbors say the shouting had already started before the car even stopped. Imagine the contrast. A quiet coastal town, the sound of ocean waves, and then suddenly, royal fury breaking the calm. A woman's voice, sharp and cutting. A man's reply, low but trembling. And then, the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. At first, no one wanted to believe it was them. Not in Montecito. Not the couple who had just smiled for cameras hours earlier. But when the security lights flickered on and their silhouettes appeared in the driveway, there was no mistaking who it was. Meghan stood by the gate, gesturing wildly. Harry moved closer, trying to calm her down. But she stepped back. He raised his voice. And then, silence again. It's easy to dismiss this as a lover's quarrel. Every couple fights, right? But what makes this moment different is how fast it spread. Within 20 minutes, local gossip circles were buzzing. A staff member from a nearby estate texted a friend, who leaked it to a freelance photographer. By dawn, at least 3 agencies were offering money for footage. But that's when things got even stranger. Normally, Harry and Meghan's team would issue a quick denial, maybe a polished statement about private moments taken out of context. Instead, silence. Total radio silence. And then, reports of security going door to door, asking residents if they had Ring camera footage from that night. One source even said a legal representative offered compensation in exchange for deleting clips. Why? What was on those recordings that scared them so much? Now, here's a thought. If you were trying to hide something that could destroy the last shreds of your public image, wouldn't you do the same? But here's the twist. Not all footage disappeared. A neighbor, who'd been wary of the Sussexes since their move, refused to comply. That's how we know what we know. The fight wasn't just heated, it was personal. Words like betrayal and liar were thrown. Meghan reportedly accused Harry of something that left him visibly shaken. So what was it? What could possibly make Meghan Markle, who has built her entire post-royal identity on control and image, lose composure so publicly? We'll get to that, but first, it's important to understand the pattern. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was a spark in a long fuse that's been burning quietly behind palace walls and studio contracts. A slow unraveling that had been months in the making. Let's pull back for a moment and consider the bigger picture. Since stepping down from royal duties, Harry and Meghan's life has been a series of highs and lows. Netflix deals, media backlash, lawsuits, and constant speculation. To outsiders, Montecito looked like their sanctuary. But those who've seen it up close describe something else, a fortress of pressure. Every interview, every appearance, every partnership had to prove they were thriving without the crown. Every day, another performance. Until the roles blurred with reality. You can almost feel the exhaustion behind their smiles. The Dodgers game wasn't just a night out, it was an audition. For relevance. For public redemption. For each other. But by the time they got home, the act had collapsed. The applause had faded. And the truth, as it always does, slipped through the cracks. So what truth are we talking about? That's where this story takes a darker turn. Because sources close to the couple claim that the argument wasn't just about a text or a tabloid leak. It was about something much deeper. A betrayal, not from an outsider, but from within. Something Harry discovered recently that made him question everything. That discovery, according to one insider, began with a phone call Meghan made earlier that evening. The same call she made right before the Dodgers game started. And when Harry found out who was on the other end of that call, it ignited a firestorm. At first glance, it might sound like another Hollywood scandal. But think about this. Why would the palace be briefed about a domestic argument within 24 hours? Why would staff in London suddenly go silent after being asked for comment? Because what happened that night didn't just shake Montecito, it sent ripples across the Atlantic. For the royal family, it confirmed something they'd suspected all along, that the Sussex story was far from the fairy tale it claimed to be. And perhaps the most chilling part of all, someone was watching. That's right, several security cameras captured fragments of the argument. Footage that was meant to remain private. But one clip, according to an insider familiar with the recordings, leaked online briefly before being taken down. It showed Meghan turning away as Harry reached for her arm. The clip was only 5 seconds long, but it was enough to set the internet ablaze. Now, here's the question no one wants to ask. Why did Harry, the man who fled the UK to protect his family from media intrusion, end up reenacting his worst nightmare under his own front porch lights? Maybe because you can run from the crown, but you can't run from the truth. And that night, the truth came knocking. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The same media frenzy they once blamed for destroying their peace now circles back to expose their reality. The cameras they despised became mirrors, reflecting what their brand tried so hard to hide. But beneath the irony lies something human. Pain, disappointment, disillusionment. Because for all the glamour and scandal, at the core of this story is a man who thought he'd escaped his past, and a woman who thought she could rewrite hers. That collision was inevitable. So where does that leave them now? Rumors are swirling. Of separation, of new deals gone wrong, of phone calls to lawyers and old friends in London. But the truth, as one source told us, is far messier than anyone wants to admit. What began as a night of baseball and laughter ended in accusations that could tear apart not just a marriage, but a public empire built on illusion. And here's where you need to stay with me. Because what came next, after the shouting, after the silence, after the flashing lights, would make even their harshest critics pause. Because this wasn't just another argument. It was the moment the world finally saw through the performance. So, what did Meghan say that pushed Harry over the edge? What secret call started it all? And why did the palace's reaction come faster than any of their official responses in years? The answers lie in the hours that followed. The drive, the argument, and the mystery that's still unraveling in Montecito. What if the moment everything fell apart for Harry and Meghan happened not behind palace walls, but under the bright lights of a baseball stadium? What if the cracks that the world ignored for months finally split open in front of tens of thousands of cheering fans? That's where our story truly begins, at Dodger Stadium, where image met reality and the performance of a lifetime started to unravel. It was supposed to be harmless. Just another celebrity outing, royal exiles mingling with Hollywood's elite. Meghan had planned it weeks in advance. Her team coordinated seating, lighting, even which camera angles would capture her reactions during the game. She wanted this night to be perfect because it wasn't really about baseball. It was about reclaiming the narrative. But here's the question. What happens when the audience stops buying the act? From the moment they stepped into the VIP suite, something felt off. Meghan entered first, greeting a few familiar faces with that trademark smile, a smile that photographers once called her armor. But Harry followed 2 steps behind, hands in pockets, scanning the crowd as if looking for an exit. Not the energy of a man thrilled to be there, more like someone fulfilling an obligation. It's subtle moments like these that tell the real story. The way he avoided her touch when she reached for his hand. The way she laughed too loudly when someone mentioned the royals. Every movement was loaded, every glance choreographed, every silence deafening. The first inning was harmless enough. They posed, they waved, they clapped. But by the second, the tension was visible even to those watching from afar. A fan seated a few rows down later posted online. They looked disconnected. Meghan was on her phone half the time. Harry kept sipping his drink, barely talking. Now, imagine this. 2 people who once captured the world's sympathy now sitting side by side like strangers. So what went wrong? According to a source close to one of the stadium staffers, it started before the game even began. Meghan had received a call in the car on their way there. Short, sharp, private. She ended it quickly but looked irritated. Harry reportedly asked who it was, and she brushed him off. That was the first spark. He stayed silent the rest of the ride. By the time they arrived, the mood was set. Icy politeness for the cameras, cold detachment behind the smiles. And here's where it gets almost cinematic. Between innings, cameras caught Meghan chatting animatedly with a studio executive she'd met at an awards event last year. Harry, visibly uncomfortable, leaned back, glancing away as she touched the man's arm in greeting. It lasted only seconds, but the internet saw it. Within hours, screenshots were trending under hashtags about awkward body language and royal tension. Now, this might sound trivial, but for Meghan, optics are everything. For Harry, humiliation is poison. That tiny, meaningless moment was gasoline on an old fire. As the game progressed, Meghan kept glancing toward the field, pretending to follow the score, but her mind was elsewhere. She whispered to Harry. He didn't respond. She tried again, more insistent this time. Witnesses said she leaned in close, lips tight, voice sharp enough to make him flinch. One insider described it perfectly. It wasn't the argument itself, it was the energy. You could feel years of resentment sitting between them. And yet, when the big screen panned toward them for the celebrity cam, both immediately switched masks. Meghan threw her head back in laughter. Harry clapped politely, eyes distant. It was the performance of a couple trying to remember their lines. But there's something haunting about watching people pretend. Because beneath the noise of the crowd, the truth was whispering. Let's pause and ask something simple. How did it come to this? 2 people who once stood at the altar promising unity, now reduced to silent warfare in a public stadium. Maybe the answer lies not in what they said that night, but what they didn't. Every story has a moment when pretending stops working. For Meghan, that moment came during the 7th inning stretch. A commentator mentioned the royal family during the broadcast, specifically Prince William and Kate Middleton's upcoming charity event in London. The crowd cheered. Meghan froze. Harry smiled faintly. That smile, innocent to the audience, felt like betrayal to her. She leaned over and muttered something through gritted teeth. A few seats away, a couple noticed her expression change from practiced warmth to cold anger. One described it later as the kind of look that says, "We're going to talk about this later." And talk they did, but not yet. Because for the next 30 minutes, Meghan tried to recover, forcing conversation with those around her. She talked about film deals, charity ventures, the usual safe topics. But the energy never returned. Harry kept glancing at his watch, eager for the game to end. Then came the last play. The crowd roared, fireworks lit up the sky, and while everyone else celebrated, Harry and Meghan stood in silence. He clapped once, absent-mindedly. She smiled thinly. The cameras caught the moment perfectly. The two of them bathed in light, looking like winners but standing miles apart. That photo went viral before they even left the stadium. What no one realized at the time was that it captured the precise second before everything exploded. Now, this is where the contradictions start piling up. On social media, Meghan's PR team quickly flooded the internet with glowing headlines. The Sussexes steal the spotlight at Dodgers game. Harry and Meghan's glamorous date night. But behind the scenes, those who were there tell a very different story. When the couple exited the VIP box, Harry walked ahead, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Meghan followed several steps behind, whispering sharply to her assistant. The cameras caught the moment he turned back briefly, his expression blank, hers burning with frustration. It was brief, but it said everything. Inside the parking area, another witness described hearing Meghan raise her voice. "You always do this," followed by Harry replying something too low to catch. But his tone, desperate, weary, was unmistakable. Imagine that for a second. A man who once defied his entire royal bloodline for love, now reduced to arguing in public like a stranger on the street. You can almost feel the irony clawing at the edges of the story. Because here's what the world doesn't always understand about power couples. The bigger the image, the more fragile the foundation. Every smile, every gesture, every headline becomes part of a brand. And when that brand starts to crack, both partners scramble to keep it standing. That night, the facade cracked loud enough for everyone to hear. And there's something else. A small but important detail most outlets missed. A staff member seated 2 boxes over claimed to have seen Meghan take a phone call mid-game. She slipped out briefly, standing near a corridor exit, phone to ear. When she returned, her entire demeanor changed. She was distant, tight-lipped, her laughter gone. Who was on the other end of that call? That question haunted Harry the entire ride home. And it's the reason the argument in Montecito turned into something much bigger. But for now, picture the scene. The roaring crowd fading into the night, the flashing cameras dying down, and Harry and Meghan exiting under the stadium's cold fluorescent lights. 2 figures trapped between what they show the world and what they can't hide from each other. A fan video from that night shows Meghan brushing past Harry, lips moving quickly while he tries to keep walking. At one point, he stops and turns as if to respond, then decides against it. The clip ends there. But insiders say that exchange set the tone for what was coming next. Even their driver, a man who's worked with celebrities for years, reportedly said afterward that the tension inside the car felt like walking into a storm. It's easy to judge from afar, to see the glittering images and assume perfection. But nights like these remind us that fame doesn't fix what's broken, it magnifies it. And that's exactly what happened here. By the time the stadium lights went dark, the illusion was over. For the first time, the cracks weren't just visible, they were undeniable. And as the couple disappeared into their waiting SUV, few realized they were driving straight into a night that would change everything. Because what started in the bright lights of Dodger Stadium wasn't just a fight. It was a countdown. A countdown to confrontation. A countdown to exposure. A countdown to truth. And when that truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't just shake Montecito. It would ripple through the entire royal narrative. But before we reach that breaking point, you have to understand what happened next. Because the drive home from that stadium wasn't silent. It was the beginning of the storm. And by the time they reached their mansion gates, voices would rise, accusations would fly, and the night sky over Montecito would echo with the sound of a royal implosion. It started as a drive home. Nothing more. A quiet ride down California's coastal highway, headlights slicing through fog, the Pacific stretching endlessly beside them. But inside that luxury SUV, the air was heavy, thick with unspoken words. Two people sitting inches apart, yet emotionally miles away. You know that kind of silence that's louder than any argument? That was the sound inside that car. Meghan stared out the tinted window, scrolling through her phone. Harry sat rigid, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Between them, a driver trained not to notice tension, pretending not to hear the shallow breaths and occasional sighs from the back seat. But make no mistake, this wasn't a simple lover's quarrel. This was years of resentment, betrayal, and exhaustion finally meeting in the dark. So what really happened during that drive? According to one insider close to their security detail, the couple didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Not one word. But then Harry broke the silence. "Who were you calling earlier?" he asked. Meghan didn't answer. She just kept scrolling. That one moment set off everything that followed. You could almost feel the temperature in the car drop. Harry pressed again. "You took a call during the game. Who was it?" Meghan finally looked at him and said coldly, "It was work." 2 words, flat and dismissive. But Harry didn't believe her. He'd seen that same evasive look before. The same one that had caused arguments back in London, when Meghan's phone would buzz at odd hours and she'd step into another room to answer. It wasn't just about who she was calling. It was about what she was hiding. He tried to stay calm, but frustration bubbled up. "You said you'd be present tonight. You said we were doing this together," he said. Meghan exhaled sharply. "Together," she repeated, almost laughing. "Harry, it was one night out. Don't make it something it's not." But it was something. It was everything. Because for Harry, it wasn't just a baseball game. It was supposed to be a rare moment where they could appear united, put the rumors to rest, and maybe, just maybe, feel normal again. Instead, it turned into a reminder of how far apart they drifted. The driver kept his eyes on the road, but the tension in the rearview mirror was unmistakable. Meghan's reflection, cold, tight-jawed. Harry's, lost, wounded. And that's when it happened. Meghan's phone lit up again. An incoming call. She looked at it, hesitated, and quickly turned it face down. Harry noticed. "Take it," he said, his voice low. She shook her head. "It can wait." But his tone sharpened. "Take it." She didn't. Instead, she said, "You're being paranoid again." Those words hit harder than any shout could. Paranoid again. The same phrase she'd used before their Oprah interview when he worried about how much to reveal. The same phrase during their Netflix negotiations when he questioned the narrative they were building. Every time he hesitated, every time he doubted, she labeled it paranoia. But this time, it wasn't about control, it was about truth. Harry leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not paranoid, Meghan. I just want to know who's calling you at midnight after a game." Her reply came like a knife. "Someone who actually listens." Silence. The driver said later it was the longest 15 seconds of his career. The kind of silence that makes your stomach knot, that feels alive and dangerous. Then, a muffled sound, Harry's voice, shaking. "What's that supposed to mean?" Meghan didn't answer right away. She just stared ahead, her reflection in the window merging with the blur of passing streetlights. "You think you know everything, Harry. You don't know me anymore." And maybe she was right. Because in that moment, he didn't recognize her. The woman sitting next to him wasn't the same one who once held his hand under palace scrutiny, or who whispered, "We're in this together," the night they left England. This version of Meghan was colder, harder, a woman fighting for control, even in chaos. Then, another twist. The car slowed suddenly. Red and blue lights flashed ahead, a random police checkpoint. Routine, harmless. But to Harry, it felt symbolic. The world slowing down, forcing them to face what they'd been avoiding. While the driver handed over documents, Meghan muttered under her breath, "Great. Just what we need." Harry looked at her, then out the window, where the officer's flashlight swept across the car. For a moment, he wondered what it would be like to roll down the window, tell the truth, to say, "We're not okay." But he didn't. He stayed silent, just like he always did. When the car started moving again, Meghan spoke softly. "You should have smiled more tonight. You looked miserable." That line broke him. "Miserable," he said, his voice rising. "You think I care about smiling when everything's falling apart? When you're lying to me?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't twist this around, Harry. You've been impossible lately." Ever since, she stopped herself. Ever since what? That unfinished sentence hung between them like smoke. But Harry already knew. Ever since the palace leaks. Ever since his father stopped taking his calls. ever since their brand began to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. The tension boiled over. "You talk about truth, but you hide everything," he snapped. "Your phone, your calls, your plans. What else don't I know?" Meghan turned to face him fully now, her expression sharp. "Don't you dare lecture me about truth. You've been lying to yourself since the day we left that palace." Her words cut deep because they weren't entirely wrong. Harry stared at her, trying to find the woman he once believed in. The one who convinced him they were building something honest, free from the lies of the monarchy. But somewhere along the line, honesty became strategy, love became branding, and freedom became another cage. The driver slowed as they reached the winding roads of Montecito. Mansions rose like ghosts on either side. The night air outside was calm, but inside that car, it was a storm. Meghan crossed her arms, muttering, "You'll thank me one day when you realize I've been protecting you." Harry frowned. "Protecting me? From what?" Her eyes flicked to the window, avoiding his. "From yourself. Now think about that. Protecting him from himself. What could she possibly mean? Was she referring to his mental health? His public image? Or something else, something darker, that she didn't dare say aloud? The car turned into their street. The security lights of their mansion flickered ahead, but instead of relief, dread filled the car. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Then Meghan's phone buzzed again. This time, Harry reached for it. "Fast. Give me that," she snapped, grabbing his wrist. He didn't back down. "Who's calling you, Meghan?" The driver, sensing trouble, kept his eyes forward. Meghan's voice rose. "It's none of your business." "None of my." Harry stopped himself, his voice trembling. "Everything we've built is my business." And that's when she said it, the line that neighbors later heard echoing from the driveway. "Maybe that's the problem, Harry. Maybe we haven't built anything real at all." He froze, because somewhere deep down, he knew she believed it. The car pulled to a stop at the mansion gates. No one moved. Meghan stared straight ahead. Harry sat motionless, his jaw clenched. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Then Harry spoke, barely above a whisper. "I don't even know who you are anymore." She turned to him, eyes cold. "Then maybe you never did." The gates opened. The car rolled slowly forward, gravel crunching beneath the tires. For a moment, it seemed like the argument was over. But then Meghan's phone buzzed again. And this time, Harry saw the name flash on the screen, a name he recognized. His expression changed instantly. The driver parked. Meghan reached for her bag, but Harry stopped her. His voice was quiet now, dangerous in its calm. "Why is he calling you?" She froze. "You told me you cut ties with him months ago," he continued. "So why is his name on your screen?" Meghan's hand trembled slightly. "It's not what you think." But it was too late. Harry stepped out of the car, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed across the courtyard, bouncing off the quiet Montecito hills. Meghan followed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Harry, listen to me." But he wasn't listening anymore. Because in that instant, everything he feared about her secrecy, her ambition, her double life, it all started to make sense. Imagine you're sitting on your porch in Montecito, enjoying the cool California air, when you hear it, the faint sound of raised voices in the distance. At first, it's barely noticeable, the kind of background noise you might dismiss as nothing. But then it rises, sharper, more distinct, filled with tension. And suddenly, you realize it's not just anyone arguing. It's them, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. For the people who lived near Harry and Meghan, that night wasn't just another evening in their quiet neighborhood. It was the sound of royal drama unfolding in real time. And when the argument escalated, they couldn't help but listen. Now, let's take you there, to the heart of Montecito, the picturesque town that has become home to the Sussexes since their dramatic exit from the UK. The neighborhood, with its tall hedges, winding roads, and multi-million-dollar estates, is the picture of peace and privacy. A place where everyone knows everyone, but no one dares to get too involved. And yet, that night, something broke through the veneer of this perfect, secluded world. It started with a whisper, then a shout. A neighbor, who requested to remain anonymous, later described what they heard as the worst kind of argument, the kind you don't want to overhear but can't seem to avoid. It wasn't just a fight. It was raw, like two people who didn't know how to talk to each other anymore, the neighbor said. According to several reports from those who heard the exchange, the argument began softly, but quickly built in intensity. At first, it was just Meghan's voice, rising with frustration. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her words barely audible through the thick walls of their estate. Then came Harry's voice, low but intense. "Then leave," he replied. A few seconds of silence. And then, a louder bang, like something hard hitting the ground. Some witnesses speculated it might have been Meghan's phone, dropped in frustration. Others believed it was something else, perhaps the sound of her slamming a door. But the noise was enough to send a ripple of concern through the neighborhood. One neighbor, who had seen the Sussexes at several community events, described it as a confrontation that felt like it was playing out in front of everyone, even though they were inside their house. But it wasn't just the sound of the argument that stood out. It was the words. According to a second witness, Meghan accused Harry of never being there when she needs him and of hiding behind his royal title to escape the mess they've created. Her voice, they said, cracked with frustration, but there was something else in it, a hint of accusation, something that hinted at deeper resentment than the public had ever been allowed to see. Harry's response was chilling in its coldness. "I'm not the one who's hiding, Meghan. You've been pretending since the day we left. We're both pretending." The words hung in the air long after they were spoken. Pretending. That one word encapsulated everything they had tried so hard to shield from the public. How their marriage, their carefully constructed image, was a fragile illusion. It was the kind of word you only say when the foundation you've built everything on is starting to crack. Then, something unexpected happened. Meghan's voice lowered. For the first time during the argument, she spoke softly, almost too softly to hear. "I did everything for us, Harry. I sacrificed everything. I came here, to this life, and I gave up everything I was. And you still don't trust me." The words struck Harry like a slap in the face. He responded quickly, his voice strained. "I never asked you to give up anything, Meghan. I didn't even ask you to come here. But this isn't what I imagined. This isn't what I thought we were building." There was a pause, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they might be at a crossroads. Would they finally talk it through? Would they come to some kind of understanding? But instead, the moment was broken by a loud bang, this time from the gate. The security staff, who had been discreetly monitoring the situation from the perimeter, had apparently heard enough. That was when things escalated quickly. Meghan, in a fit of frustration, reportedly kicked a trash can, sending it clattering against the wall. "You want me to leave, Harry? Fine. Maybe I will." She turned sharply, walking toward the front door. But before she could open it, Harry reached out and grabbed her arm. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice shaking. "But don't act like this is all on me. You don't get to make me the villain here." Another neighbor, whose home sat several houses down from the Sussexes' estate, said they could hear the entire exchange. It was like a storm was brewing in their house, and it wasn't just about a disagreement. It was the kind of fight that makes you wonder how much longer they'll be able to keep up the act. That's when things took a turn for the worse. According to one report, Meghan finally turned around, her eyes blazing. "I'm not acting, Harry. You've been acting for both of us. And now we're paying for it." And then, the thing that shook the neighborhood to its core, Harry's response. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we're both just acting. But I can't keep pretending." There was a moment of silence. Then, as if on cue, Meghan opened the door and stepped outside. Her voice could be heard clearly from the yard as she made one final statement. "I don't know who I'm even doing this for anymore." At that moment, another neighbor who had been listening from their porch described hearing the sound of Meghan's footsteps retreating down the driveway. And then, suddenly, everything went silent. For a moment, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The couple's mansion stood in stark contrast to the chaos that had just erupted in their lives. The perfectly manicured lawn, the luxurious vehicles, the walls that had been built to keep out the world, now seemed like a brittle, empty shell. But it wasn't just the neighbors who were witnessing this unraveling. Across the street, a local paparazzo who had been trailing them for weeks managed to catch the last few moments of the argument. The photographer snapped a quick picture of Harry standing at the door, looking out after Meghan, his face a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. That picture would be the one that made headlines the next day, because it wasn't just a photo of two people arguing. It was a glimpse into the truth the world had been denying. A glimpse into the real Harry and Meghan, not the carefully crafted personas they had shown the world. But here's the thing. While the world would soon be debating the authenticity of that photo, what was even more striking was what came next, something that no one expected, least of all the neighbors who had witnessed the fight. Because after that door slammed, and after the last of the shouting faded into the distance, what happened inside those walls would shock everyone. And it wasn't just about a fight. It was about the secrets they'd been keeping from each other and from the world. Imagine a moment of raw emotion, an argument, a fight, the kind that makes you question everything you've believed about a person. Then, just as the dust begins to settle, an unexpected phone call shatters whatever fragile calm remains. That's exactly what happened that night. When Meghan Markle's phone buzzed for the second time during the argument, it wasn't just another text message or voicemail. This was the moment that sent Harry into a spiral of suspicion and disbelief. You see, when Meghan dismissed the first call earlier in the evening, Harry let it go. He didn't press her. But after the argument reached its peak, after Meghan stormed out of the house, Harry's instincts told him that something wasn't adding up. Meghan's refusal to answer that second call wasn't just an act of defiance. It was a red flag. In the quiet aftermath of the fight, Harry had one question ringing in his mind. Who was calling her? He had a sinking feeling. This wasn't just a random caller. This wasn't an innocent business inquiry. Meghan's behavior, the phone call she'd answered earlier, and now this new, mysterious buzz. All of it seemed connected to something deeper. Something Harry had suspected for a while, but hadn't fully confronted. So he did what any person would do when faced with doubt. He tried to find the truth. But what he didn't expect was the storm that was about to hit. When Harry confronted Meghan about the call, his tone wasn't angry. It was measured, careful. "Meghan, who was it?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Her answer? Silence. The seconds dragged on. Meghan didn't even look at him. She just stared ahead, her hand gripping the phone tightly. Her body language spoke volumes. "I won't tell you." "Who is it?" Harry asked again, more urgently this time. Meghan hesitated. She exhaled sharply and muttered, "It's nobody, Harry. Just someone from work." But Harry wasn't buying it. He could see the way her fingers twitched, the subtle panic in her eyes. He knew there was more to the story. And for the first time in their relationship, he wasn't about to let it go. "Meghan, stop lying to me," he said, his voice breaking through the tension like a knife. "Who is it? I need to know." This time, her reaction was different. She didn't get angry. Instead, she shut down completely, locking herself away behind her defenses. "I said it's nobody," she repeated, this time with a coldness that sent chills down Harry's spine. Now, think about that for a second. When someone shuts down like that, when they refuse to give you any answers, it's a signal. It's the kind of signal that tells you they're hiding something. And Harry wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was certain, but there was something even more troubling, something that added fuel to the fire. It wasn't just the call itself. It was the name that flashed on the screen when the call came through. Harry caught a glimpse of it before she turned the phone face down, the name that made his heart race. A name he recognized, a name he hadn't seen in months. It was him, the man from her past. Now, this wasn't just any man. This was someone Meghan had promised she'd cut ties with, someone Harry had been uneasy about since their early days together. A man who had a history with Meghan, someone from her acting days. Someone Harry had always been suspicious of, but had never been able to fully understand. And in that moment, as the name flashed across the screen, Harry realized something that shook him to the core. Meghan had lied to him. She had lied to him about this person, about their relationship, and about what she had been hiding. But why would she go to such lengths to hide this person from him? What were they talking about on the phone? Why had she kept him a secret for so long? The questions kept swirling in Harry's mind as he watched Meghan try to regain control of the situation. She could sense the shift in the air, the tension that had been building for months, now coming to a head. And then came the bombshell. Meghan turned to face Harry, her expression hardening. "You don't trust me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. That's the problem. Her words hit Harry like a slap. Trust. That word, trust, had always been the cornerstone of their relationship. It was the foundation on which everything else had been built. But now, that foundation was crumbling. And here's the real kicker. Meghan knew exactly what she was doing. She was deflecting. Instead of answering Harry's questions, she twisted the conversation back to him, making him the villain. "It's always been about control, Harry," she said, her tone biting. You never let me have a life of my own. You never let me be myself. You've always been the prince, and I've always been the duchess. You can't even see me for who I am anymore." And in that moment, something shifted. The argument wasn't about the call. It wasn't about the lies or the secrets. It was about something much deeper, something that had been buried beneath years of expectations, of public scrutiny, of both their desire to prove something to the world. Harry stood there, staring at her, unable to find the words. Because deep down, he knew she was right. He had been controlling. He had been so focused on maintaining the image of a perfect family that he had lost sight of the woman in front of him. But Meghan wasn't blameless, either. She had kept her own secrets, hidden behind a mask of empowerment and independence. And now, those secrets were coming to light, one painful revelation at a time. The silence between them grew thick. Neither of them knew how to move forward. They stood in the doorway of their Montecito home, each with their own thoughts, their own doubts. But then, the final twist. As Harry turned to walk away, trying to collect his thoughts, Meghan's phone buzzed once more. This time, she didn't hesitate. She picked it up immediately, her face hardening as she read the text. Harry couldn't help himself. "Who is it this time?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Meghan didn't answer. She just pocketed the phone and walked past him without a word. And that, in many ways, was the moment that everything changed. Because what Harry didn't know, what no one knew, was that the text she received was from the same person. The one who had called earlier. The one whose name Harry had seen flash across her screen. The mystery caller was more than just a name. It was a key. A key to understanding the fracture in their relationship. And as Harry watched Meghan retreat into their home, he realized that everything they had fought for, everything they had built, was starting to unravel. Because the real question wasn't who called Meghan. The real question was why she had been keeping this person in her life at all. And as Harry stood there, staring at the empty doorway, he knew this was just the beginning. In the age of surveillance, privacy is a luxury few people can afford. And in the case of Harry and Meghan, even their most private moments were no longer their own. After the argument that night, the couple thought they had control of the situation, thought they could retreat behind their estate's high walls and away from the prying eyes of the world. But unbeknownst to them, those walls were anything but secure. While the Sussexes believed they could patch things up behind closed doors, the truth was far more elusive. There were cameras everywhere, and not just the ones in the paparazzi's hands. The cameras they never thought to consider. It all started with a single, unremarkable moment. Harry and Meghan's quiet walk back into their Montecito home, after a night of public humiliation and private despair. At first, they felt safe. They had security guards posted around the perimeter of their property, walls tall enough to block anyone's view. And surely, after everything that had gone down, they thought they had a moment to collect themselves. But the reality was darker than they imagined. As soon as they passed through the front door, someone else was watching, someone who had been there long before that night. Security footage, meant to monitor the exterior of the property, caught every tense moment between the couple. The footage wasn't just restricted to their estate, either. There were cameras hidden within the walls of Montecito itself. Neighbors had installed their own security systems, including Ring doorbells and other monitoring devices, footage that would later go viral. In the digital age, secrets never stay hidden for long. But there's something even more unsettling about the footage that surfaced. It wasn't just the obvious tension between Harry and Meghan that night, although that, in itself, was enough to fuel 1,000 tabloid articles. It was the subtle, chilling detail that no one noticed until after the dust settled. The footage captured something neither Harry nor Meghan could have anticipated. As Meghan walked inside their house, her eyes glued to her phone, Harry stood still for a moment. His body language said everything. Frustration, confusion, and a growing sense of betrayal. As he crossed the threshold, he briefly turned around to look back at the driveway. That's when the camera caught something important, something small but revealing. A shadow. A figure standing just outside the security gates, barely visible to the naked eye, but undeniably there. At first, it seemed like an odd coincidence. Who would be waiting outside at that hour, in the dark, after such an explosive argument? But then, as more footage came in, footage from the neighbors' cameras, it became clear that someone had been watching them for much longer than they realized. The mystery deepened. The figure in the shadows was no longer just a random passerby. It was someone connected to the couple's inner circle, someone close enough to their world to know when to show up, when to leave, and exactly when the Sussexes' most vulnerable moments would unfold. This person wasn't just a spectator. They were complicit in the unfolding drama. But why? What did this person know? Why were they watching, and what were they hoping to uncover? The truth was more twisted than anyone could have imagined. As the neighbors' cameras continued to record the movements near the Sussexes' gates, more unsettling details emerged. The figure had been there at various points throughout the day, often lingering, watching Harry and Meghan enter and exit their home. But it wasn't just the timing of the sightings that was alarming. It was the method of observation. This figure knew exactly where to stand, where to wait, how to stay just out of sight. They were intentionally blending in with the shadows, expertly manipulating the cameras to stay hidden. And that's when the first breakthrough came. One of the neighbors, whose camera had captured the figure, reviewed the footage more closely. At first, the shadowy figure was nearly impossible to make out, but upon closer inspection, a subtle detail caught their eye. The person was carrying something, a small device, almost like a phone. It didn't seem important at first, but when the neighbor sent the footage to a security expert, the expert immediately recognized what it was. It wasn't just any phone, it was an encrypted device. A phone used specifically for private communications. A phone that couldn't be traced. That's when the pieces started to fall into place. Meghan's mysterious caller, the one whose name had appeared on her screen, was connected to something much bigger. This wasn't just a random argument or a fleeting moment of tension between two celebrities. This was the start of a deeper conspiracy, one that had been orchestrated from the shadows. The hidden cameras weren't just capturing the downfall of a marriage. They were documenting the unraveling of a much more dangerous secret. But who was the figure watching them? The answer, as it turns out, was far more shocking than anyone could have expected. The figure was none other than a former associate of Meghan's, a name that Harry had heard once or twice, but never paid much attention to. This person had connections within Hollywood, sure, but more importantly, they had connections to an even more powerful figure, someone with ties to the royal family. That's right, the person watching them wasn't just some random observer. They were there for a reason. They were there to gather information. And in the days that followed, the information they collected would be used against Meghan and Harry in ways they couldn't even imagine. But that wasn't the only thing that was uncovered. As the footage continued to be examined, it became clear that the figure wasn't the only one spying on the Sussexes. Hidden cameras had been placed around their entire property, and not just by neighbors, by someone much closer to them. Someone who had access to their home, their movements, and their private lives. Someone who had been there long before that night and would be there long after. But why had they done it? Why had someone so close to Harry and Meghan decided to track their every move, film their every argument, and send the footage to outside sources? The answer wasn't what anyone expected. It was simple: control. Someone wanted control over Harry and Meghan. They wanted to ensure that they remained tied to their past, tied to the monarchy, tied to the stories they had tried so hard to escape. And the best way to do that was through manipulation, through secrets, surveillance, and lies. But this was only the beginning. Because the real question now was, who was behind the surveillance? Who was pulling the strings from the shadows? And what did they want from Harry and Meghan? The answers were far darker than anyone could have anticipated. And as the Sussexes continued to fight their public battles, they were unaware that the real fight was just beginning. The thing about pressure is that it doesn't build slowly. It creeps up on you like a storm, inch by inch, until you're suffocating under the weight of it all. And that's exactly what had been happening to Harry for months, even before the argument in Montecito. He had been living under an unrelenting tide of expectation, and it was finally pulling him under. Harry had always been a man caught between two worlds, one foot in the royal family, the other in the new life he'd chosen with Meghan. But in the days following the fight, he felt as if he were no longer part of either world. He wasn't just questioning Meghan or his marriage. He was questioning everything. The life they had built together, the promises they made to each other, the grand vision of their new freedom that had seemed so perfect at first. All of it was beginning to feel like an illusion. And when Harry found himself alone that night, staring out into the darkness of their Montecito home, the weight of that illusion became unbearable. How had they gotten here? How had a couple that once seemed so in love, so determined to change the world, descended into a silent war over a phone call, over lies, over secrets. He could barely breathe, the air thick with frustration and fear. The fear of losing Meghan, the fear of losing his sense of identity, the fear that their entire life, this new chapter they had so carefully curated, was a fragile house of cards, ready to collapse. But more than that, Harry feared the truth he had been too afraid to face. There was something Meghan hadn't told him, something she hadn't said during their argument. He knew it in his gut, the way she kept dodging his questions, the way she had changed. Something had shifted in her. And the worst part? He didn't know who or what had caused it. For months, Harry had been holding on to the idea that they were working towards something greater. The Netflix deals, the charity work, the global impact they were supposedly making. But deep down, he knew it wasn't real. It wasn't a legacy. It was a performance, a carefully constructed narrative built on the backs of their royal titles, their public personas, and their fractured relationship. That realization hit him like a cold slap in the face. The entire life they had built in Montecito, away from the royal family, away from their past, was nothing more than a story they had written for themselves. But stories, no matter how grand, always come to an end. And Harry knew that the end was coming for them. But here's the kicker. While Harry was spiraling, wondering what had gone wrong, Meghan was facing her own version of the same truth. She had spent months carefully crafting an image of independence and empowerment, of being a force of change in the world. But as her marriage to Harry faltered, as their carefully curated life crumbled in front of her, Meghan realized something terrifying. She was no longer in control. That loss of control had sent Meghan into a panic. She had always prided herself on being the one with the answers, the one who was always 3 steps ahead. But now, sitting in the silence of their home after the argument, she couldn't help but wonder if she had ever known what she was doing. The secrets she had been keeping, the phone calls, the mysterious contacts. How long could she keep pretending everything was fine? How much longer could she maintain the facade of a perfect life? That night, as Harry paced the house, deep in thought, Meghan sat quietly in their bedroom, staring at her phone. The screen was dim, but she couldn't bring herself to look away. She was looking for answers, trying to find something to hold on to in the chaos of it all. And that's when she received the text. It was from him, the same person who had been calling her earlier that evening, the one Harry had caught glimpses of on her phone, the name that had triggered Harry's suspicions. And that text? It was simple, but it carried a weight that Meghan couldn't ignore. "We need to talk." Now, Meghan felt the pit in her stomach tighten. She had been avoiding this conversation for months. She knew exactly who the text was from and what it meant. It wasn't just a casual check-in. It was a message that would force her to confront the very thing she had been running from, her past. But how would she explain it to Harry? How could she explain why this person, this shadow from her past, still had such a hold on her life? As the hours ticked by, Meghan wrestled with herself. She wanted to ignore the message, pretend everything was fine, and focus on repairing her relationship with Harry. But she knew deep down that ignoring it would only make things worse. She needed to make a choice. And Harry, unaware of the conversation unfolding in their bedroom, found himself facing his own crossroads. He couldn't keep pretending either. He had been waiting for answers, waiting for Meghan to open up to him, to tell him what was really going on. But instead, she had withdrawn even further. She had become a stranger in his eyes, and that hurt more than any argument could. He couldn't fight this battle alone. And as the night wore on, he found himself standing at the threshold of something he had been avoiding. The possibility that Meghan might not be the person he thought she was. The truth was staring him in the face, and it wasn't something he was ready to accept. But here's the twist. The person Meghan had been hiding, the one who had sent her that text, wasn't just a figure from her past. They were tied to something much bigger, something that would soon change everything for both of them. Harry's breaking point wasn't just about Meghan's secrecy. It was about the realization that they were both caught in a web they couldn't escape. They had built their lives around a narrative of freedom and independence. But what if that narrative was a lie? What if the very things they had fought to escape, royalty, fame, control, were the things that were pulling them back into a trap from which there was no escape? As Harry stood there, grappling with these thoughts, Meghan sent one last message. "I need you to trust me." But as Harry read the message, a chill ran through him. Trust? How could he trust her when everything around him was falling apart? In that moment, he knew that their relationship, whatever it had been, was on the verge of collapse. And what was coming next would shatter everything they had left. Because trust, once broken, is a hard thing to rebuild. And Harry knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. But Meghan, sitting in the darkness of their bedroom, had already made her choice. And when Harry finally found out who was behind the curtain, pulling the strings of their unraveling life, he would wish he had never asked. What happens when everything you've built starts to fall apart? When the image you've spent years cultivating begins to crack, exposing the raw, vulnerable core beneath. For Meghan Markle, the reality of this moment wasn't just a marital breakdown. It was a revelation that everything she thought she understood about herself, about her life, was slipping through her fingers. As she sat in the dim light of their Montecito home that night, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come and how much further she still had to go. Her past in Hollywood felt like a lifetime ago, a chapter she'd carefully closed behind her when she married Harry and stepped into the whirlwind of royal life. But now, as her marriage to Harry teetered on the edge, the shadow of her old life loomed larger than ever. For months, Meghan had kept this part of her hidden. The phone calls, the meetings, the connections to people from her acting days. These were things she thought she had left behind. But the truth was, those connections had never truly gone away. They had just been buried, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And now, that moment had arrived. Sitting in the darkness of their bedroom, Meghan's mind raced. The text she had received earlier that night, "We need to talk now," was the last thing she wanted to face. It wasn't just the content of the message that bothered her. It was the fact that it had come at all. She had promised Harry that part of her life was behind her. She had promised him that the secrets, the manipulations, the games were over. But now, she realized just how much of her past she had been keeping hidden, and how much of that past was still calling her back. She had always prided herself on her independence. She had built a brand that was all about empowerment, about taking control of her own destiny, about breaking free from the constraints of her past. But deep down, Meghan knew that her carefully constructed identity was a lie. She wasn't the woman she had convinced the world she was. She was trapped in a web of her own making. But what did she want? What was she really after? For so long, Meghan had told herself that leaving the royal family was about freedom. Freedom from the suffocating constraints of palace life. Freedom to live her life on her own terms. But as the months dragged on, she realized that what she really wanted was control. Control over her narrative. Control over how the world saw her. Control over Harry. It wasn't enough for her to escape the monarchy. She needed to rewrite the story of her life. She needed to be seen as the hero of her own tale, and for that, she would do anything. She would manipulate the media. She would play the victim. She would become whatever the world needed her to be. And for a while, it worked. The Netflix deal, the book, the interviews. All of it came together to create the image of Meghan Markle as a woman who had broken free from the royal shackles and was now doing it on her own terms. But behind the scenes, the cracks were showing. Her marriage to Harry was fraying, and the pressure to keep up appearances was suffocating. What did it all mean if she couldn't hold her family together? What was the point of the public accolades, the millions of dollars in deals, if her personal life was falling apart? The phone buzzed again. Meghan glanced down at the screen. It was the same name. The name of the person who had been in her life for so long. The one she had promised Harry she had cut ties with. She had told him it was over, that this person was part of her past. But the truth was, this person wasn't just part of her past. They were part of her future. And that terrified her. The text on the screen was simple. "We need to talk in person. You know where to find me." In an instant, Meghan's mind flashed back to the days before her life with Harry. To the late-night meetings, the whispered conversations, the deals that had been struck behind closed doors. She had always known that one day, her past would catch up with her. She had always known that the things she thought she had left behind would find their way back into her life. But now, the question wasn't just whether she was ready to confront her past. It was whether she could keep it hidden long enough to save her marriage. Meghan exhaled slowly, her fingers hovering over the phone. The decision she had to make wasn't just about the person who was waiting for her outside. It was about everything she had built, the image, the brand, the life she had promised Harry. If she answered that text, everything would change. And yet, part of her knew that change was inevitable. As much as she had tried to keep her past buried, it was always there, lurking in the background, waiting for the right moment to break free. She had tried to keep control of the narrative, of the public's perception of her, but now she realized that the narrative was slipping out of her hands. The phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call. Meghan hesitated for a long moment, her heart racing. She glanced over at Harry, who was still pacing in the other room, lost in his thoughts. She could hear him muttering to himself, trying to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed their lives. She could hear the pain in his voice, the hurt that he was trying to hide. And for the first time in a long while, Meghan felt something she hadn't felt in a while. Guilt. Guilt for the lies, for the secrets, for the distance she had put between herself and the man she had once believed in. Guilt for the things she had done to protect her image, at the cost of everything else. But guilt wasn't enough to stop her. Meghan stood up and walked toward the window, her phone still in her hand. She stared out at the dark horizon, the ocean barely visible in the distance.